She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for the florist. Chloe moved through the Elmwood Country Club like a woman who had already lived this day 3 times in her head before breakfast. Clipboard in one hand, earpiece in the other, eyes scanning every corner of the reception hall like a general reading a battlefield. The chandeliers needed adjusting. The chair sashes were the wrong shade of ivory. And somewhere between the east corridor and the bridal suite, a vendor had delivered 40 centerpiece vases when she had specifically, contractually ordered 42. 2 vases short. To most people, that's nothing. To Chloe, that was a war. She was 29 years old, sharp as a blade, and running the most prestigious wedding of her career. Jordan and Marina's big day, a sprawling, elegant affair at one of the most exclusive country clubs in the Midwest, was exactly the kind of contract that could take her small business from promising to legendary. She couldn't afford a single mistake. She never did. What nobody in that gleaming ballroom knew, what Chloe rarely let anyone know, was that underneath the professionalism, underneath the perfectly pressed blazer and the color-coded binder, was a woman who had learned very early that the moment you stop controlling things, the moment you let your guard down and trust the world to be gentle, it takes everything from you. She was 12 when her mother died, 15 when she lost her father. After that, Chloe didn't fall apart. She organized. She made schedules. She made lists. She became the kind of person that other people leaned on, because being needed felt safer than needing. By the time she built her wedding planning business from a folding table and a second-hand laptop, she had convinced herself that this was enough. The church community on Sunday mornings, her younger cousins at the dinner table, and a career she was brilliant at. Love was something she planned for other people. It had never quite made it onto her own calendar, but the Midwest has a way of humbling even the most prepared woman in the room. She was walking the venue's west corridor, muttering quietly about chair sashes, when she turned a corner and nearly collided with him. He stepped back first, hands up, easy smile, no drama. He was dressed simply, almost deliberately so. Dark slacks, a plain button-down, no watch worth noticing. If anything, he looked like he was trying not to be looked at. "Sorry about that," he said. "You must be the wedding planner." "And you must be one of the groomsmen," she replied, already moving. "Henry," he said. "Chloe," she said. She didn't slow down. She had vases to find. But then he said something that stopped her. Just one thing. He mentioned the evening light, how it would pour through the west windows at exactly 6:15, and if she centered the ceremony arch 8 inches to the left, the photographs would look like they were lit by something supernatural. He said it quietly, without performance, like a man who noticed things because he genuinely cared, not because he wanted credit. Chloe turned around, slowly. "That's actually a really good point," she said. He just nodded. No pride. No, "I told you so." He went back to whatever he was doing, and she went back to hers. She didn't think about him for the rest of the afternoon. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But there he was again at the rehearsal dinner, not commanding the room, not working the crowd, just present. She watched him steady a nervous flower girl who'd tangled herself in ribbon. Watched him quietly refill his brother Jordan's glass without being asked. Watched him notice, from across an entire dining hall, that Chloe hadn't eaten in 4 hours, and appear beside her moments later with a plate of food, and absolutely no comment about it. Just the plate, slid gently onto the table beside her clipboard. She looked up. He'd already walked away. That was the moment something shifted, though Chloe wouldn't admit it for a long time. Later that evening, under the excuse of a lighting inspection, they found themselves side by side in a golf cart, drifting slowly across the dew-wet greens as the sun melted into the horizon. He said something ridiculous. She laughed, a real laugh. The kind that takes you by surprise. The kind that escapes before you can compose yourself back into professionalism. The wind lifted her hair. The light turned everything gold. She caught him looking at her. Not the way men sometimes look, assessing, calculating. The way he looked at her was quieter than that, like he had just recognized something he hadn't expected to find. She turned back to the horizon. Her heart was doing something that was absolutely not on the schedule. She told herself it was the long day, the stress, the missing vases, She told herself that whatever this feeling was, it was manageable, containable, easily filed away before morning. Chloe was good at telling herself things. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, was that Henry was not just a groomsman, that the quiet man in the simple shirt, watching her with those careful, patient eyes, was carrying a secret that would change the entire equation, and that before this wedding was over, everything she thought she had planned, every single thing, was going to unravel. Sometimes, the universe doesn't care about your clipboard. But here's what I want you to think about, because it matters to everything that comes next. When was the last time something you never planned for turned out to be exactly what you needed? And are you brave enough to admit that your tightest grip might be the very thing standing between you and everything you actually want? There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a person when they realize they are standing at the edge of something they cannot plan their way out of. Chloe felt it the next morning before she even opened her eyes. She was lying in the modest hotel room she had booked 2 blocks from the country club. Practical, efficient, close enough to respond to any early morning crisis before it became a disaster. Her phone was already lit up on the nightstand. 47 messages in the wedding party group chat. 3 missed calls from the caterer. 1 voicemail from the florist that she already knew, from the florist's general tone in life, was not going to contain good news. She sat up, reached for her clipboard, put herself back together the way she always did, layer by layer, piece by piece, like a woman assembling armor before a battle. But just before she stood up, she paused. There was Henry's jacket folded neatly over the back of the chair by the door. She didn't remember folding it that carefully. She didn't remember deciding to bring it back to the room at all. Her hands had apparently made that decision independently of her brain, which was the kind of thing that happened when your brain was too busy pretending not to notice a man to supervise what your hands were doing. She stood up, stepped past it, and walked to the window. The country club sat in the early morning light like something from a painting, manicured greens still wet with dew, the lake at the far end of the property lying flat and silver in the quiet. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost unfair, like the world was dressing itself up specifically to lower her defenses. Chloe had learned a long time ago not to trust beautiful mornings. Beautiful mornings had a tendency to come right before something fell apart. She was right. She just didn't know yet how many things were about to fall apart, or in what order, or which one of them would turn out to be, unexpectedly, quietly, the best thing that ever happened to her. She pulled up her master timeline, took a long sip of gas station coffee she had bought the night before and microwaved twice already, and went to work. The wedding was in 11 hours. Everything was fine. She had planned for everything. She had not planned for any of what was coming. The first crisis arrived at 7:42 in the morning, which was actually earlier than Chloe usually received her first crisis, and she considered this a bad omen. The florist, whose voicemail she had known in her bones would be problematic, had experienced what he called a creative reinterpretation of the centerpiece design. What this meant in practice was that instead of the clean white and blush roses Chloe had specified in the contract, signed in 2 places, initialed in 4, the florist had decided to elevate the vision with a series of dramatic burgundy and deep purple arrangements that looked less like a Midwestern wedding and considerably more like an upscale Halloween event. Chloe stood in the delivery entrance of the country club at 7:53 in the morning, staring at 40, not 42, still 40, centerpieces in completely the wrong colors, and she breathed very slowly through her nose. "Sir," she said into the phone, in the particular quiet tone she used when she was doing her absolute best not to say what she was actually thinking. "I need you to hear me very carefully. The contract says white and blush. The bride specifically chose white and blush because her mother, who passed away 3 years ago, had white and blush at her wedding. This is not a color preference. This is a memory. And you have brought me burgundy. What I need to know right now is whether you have 42 white and blush arrangements somewhere. That I don't know about yet, or whether we are about to have a very serious problem." There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. The florist did not have 42 white and blush arrangements somewhere that she didn't know about yet. Chloe hung up. She looked at the burgundy flowers. She breathed through her nose again. And then she opened her contacts, scrolled to a backup vendor she had never used but had always kept on file because she was Chloe and she kept everything, and she made the call. 2 hours. She had 2 hours to get this corrected before the bridal party arrived for their pre-ceremony photographs, and Marina noticed the flowers her mother would never see. She was still on the phone, pacing the east corridor in low heels, mentally rebudgeting to cover the emergency order, when she rounded the corner and found Henry already there. He was standing at the far end of the hall with a cup of coffee in each hand, and an expression that told her he had heard enough of the phone call through the corridor walls to understand the situation. He held out the second cup. She stared at it for a moment. "Oat milk," he said. "Jordan mentioned you don't do dairy in the morning. Hope that's right." She took the coffee. She didn't say anything for a second, because she was suddenly aware of a very inconvenient warmth spreading somewhere in her chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the temperature of the beverage. "The flowers are wrong," she said finally. "I heard," he said. "What do you need?" "I will help. There is nothing I can do." "What do you need?" The specificity of it disarmed her in a way she wasn't prepared for at 8:15 in the morning. She told him. He listened without interrupting, without offering unsolicited opinions, without doing the thing that people sometimes did when she was clearly the most competent person in the room, the unconscious, infuriating thing where they tried to gently suggest a solution she had already considered and discarded 4 minutes ago. He just listened, and when she finished, he nodded and said, "Tell me where you need me." Chloe looked at him for just a moment longer than was professionally necessary. Then she told him where she needed him, and he went without another word, and she told herself for the second time in 12 hours that this feeling was manageable, containable, and absolutely not going to be a problem. She was wrong on all 3 counts, but she had a wedding to save first. The flowers arrived, white and blush, all 42, bless the backup vendor and everything about him, with 14 minutes to spare before Marina descended the staircase with her bridesmaids and stopped to look at the reception hall for the first time. Chloe stood just off to the side and watched the bride's face. Marina pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes filled immediately. She turned to Chloe with the expression of a woman who has been surprised by grace, and Chloe gave her a small, quiet smile and a single nod that said of course and always, and this is what I do without a single word. What the bride didn't see, what almost nobody saw, was Henry on the far side of the room, setting down the last vase he had carried in from the delivery van himself, straightening his shirt and slipping out the side door before anyone could make a thing of it. Chloe saw it. She saw it, and she filed it carefully in the part of herself she had been trying to keep locked up, and she went back to her clipboard. But here's the thing about feelings. Here's the thing that Chloe, for all her planning and all her systems and all her meticulous emotional organization, had not fully accounted for. Feelings are not like vendors. You cannot put them on a contract. You cannot negotiate their timeline. You cannot file them away just because it's inconvenient for them to exist right now. They have a way of showing up anyway, usually at the exact worst moment. Usually when your defenses are already stretched thin by burgundy centerpieces and 47 group chat messages and a morning that started with reheated gas station coffee. Feelings, as it turned out, were nothing like a checklist, and Chloe's were officially off schedule. The rehearsal had been the evening before, but the day of preparation was its own kind of rehearsal, and it was during the mid-morning bustle somewhere, between the menu confirmation and the second bridesmaid's zipper emergency, that Chloe found herself with an unexpected 20 minutes of relative calm. She slipped outside through a side door, walked across the manicured lawn to where an old oak tree spread wide at the property's edge, and sat down on the wooden bench beneath it. She pulled the pin from her hair, rubbed the back of her neck, and for 20 minutes she was not a wedding planner. She was just a tired, slightly overwhelmed woman sitting under a tree in the Midwest with oat milk coffee and a feeling she didn't know what to do with. Henry found her there. She wasn't sure if she was surprised. He sat down beside her without being invited, which should have annoyed her, and somehow didn't. He had a small container of food, something grabbed from the catering team's staff table, and he set it beside her without comment, the same way he'd handed her the coffee. No fanfare. No expectation of gratitude. Just the simple, consistent act of noticing that she needed something and providing it. Chloe looked at the food. I looked at him. I looked back at the food. Do you always feed people without asking? She said. Only the ones who forget to feed themselves, he said. She almost smiled. She ate the food, and then they talked. And this was the thing Chloe would think about later, when she was trying to reconstruct how exactly this happened, how she had gone from professional caution to something she couldn't quite categorize. They talked the way people rarely talk during the middle of a busy day, the way people usually only talk late at night when their guards are down and their filters are loose. They talked about real things. She told him about growing up in the church choir, about how gospel music felt less like songs and more like the specific sound of a community refusing to be broken. She told him about her parents, briefly, carefully. The way you mention deep wounds to someone you're not sure yet has earned the whole story. Just enough to explain certain things about herself without having to explain everything. He listened in the way she was already coming to recognize as distinctly his, completely still, completely present, like nothing in the world was more important than what she was saying, like he had nowhere else to be and no part of himself was already mentally in the next room. Then he talked. He told her about learning to golf at 10 years old at this very club. A funny story, genuinely funny, about a wayward shot that took out a decorative fountain and the look on his father's face. He told her about his family, about Jordan, about what it meant to him to show up for his brother in ways that weren't always visible. He mentioned the youth program he had donated to, the charity golf tournament his family organized every fall, and the way he said these things, not like a man building a resume, but like a man who wanted her to understand his values because values were what mattered, told Chloe something important about who Henry actually was beneath the quiet exterior. He had money. He hadn't said so yet, but a woman who had worked with wealthy families for nearly a decade developed a sense for it, the particular ease of a man who had never had to count a bill in his life. She'd assumed it, filed it, dismissed it as irrelevant. What she hadn't assumed, what she hadn't filed away anywhere because it didn't have a category yet, was that the money appeared to be genuinely, almost completely, beside the point of who he was. That was unusual. In Chloe's experience, that was almost unheard of. "What's the best wedding you've ever planned?" he asked, somewhere in the middle of all of it. She thought about it seriously because he asked seriously. "A small one," she said finally. "About 60 guests." The groom cried during the vows and the bride started laughing at him crying. And then everyone was laughing and crying at the same time, and the photographer almost dropped her camera. It was nothing like the plan. It was perfect. Henry smiled at that, the wide, real one, not the polite social version. "So, your favorite wedding was the one that went off script?" Chloe opened her mouth to correct him. I closed it. I opened it again. "I prefer to call it adaptive," she said. He laughed. She laughed. And in the sound of both their laughter mixing under the old oak tree on a Wednesday morning in the Midwest, something that had been quietly assembling itself for 2 days, quietly finished assembling. She could not have told you exactly when she decided she was in trouble, but somewhere between the oak tree and the moment she stood up, smoothed her blazer, and told herself firmly that she had a seating chart that needed reviewing, Chloe understood that she was no longer entirely in control of herself. The question was what exactly she was going to do about it, and underneath that question was a deeper one, the one she had been carrying since she was 15 years old, the one she had packed under 6 layers of professionalism and community responsibility and other people's love stories. What happens if I want something for myself and it doesn't work out? What do I do with the loss? She walked back to the building. She didn't have an answer yet. She had a seating chart. By mid-afternoon, the country club was a controlled kind of beautiful chaos. The bridal party had completed photographs. The groomsmen were in various states of tie adjustment and mock complaints about collar sizes. The catering team was doing the elegant, tightly choreographed backstage ballet that good catering teams did. Nobody in the ballroom would ever know how close the timing always was, and that was exactly how it was supposed to work. Chloe was everywhere. That was the only way to describe it. She was at the venue entrance confirming the arrival of early guests. She was backstage ensuring the bride's veil was correctly secured. She was in the kitchen, verifying the dietary accommodations. She was, in 3 different places, solving 3 different problems simultaneously, and doing all of it with the focused calm of a surgeon and the quiet warmth of a pastor's daughter who had learned that people needed both competence and tenderness in their highest moments. Henry watched her from a distance more than once. He watched her talk a nervous groomsman out of a panic spiral with a combination of clear instructions and exactly the right moment of gentle humor. He watched her materialize beside Marina when the bride's hands were shaking and take them both in hers with a steadiness that passed directly from Chloe's body into Marina's like electricity through a wire. He watched her step outside for 45 seconds, exactly 45, he noticed, and just breathe, and then step back in like she had never left. He thought about the word grace. He thought about how people used it loosely, how he had used it loosely in his life before this week, and how watching Chloe move through this day had given the word a specific shape it hadn't had before. He was also watching his brother, and what he saw in Jordan's face as the afternoon deepened was not what it should have been. Jordan was performing happily. Henry knew the difference, because he knew Jordan the way you only know a person if you have watched them every day for 35 years. He knew the specific set of Jordan's jaw when something was wrong. He knew the half-second delay between Jordan's smile and the moment Jordan's eyes caught up with it. He had been seeing both all day, and what it told him, quietly and with increasing certainty, was that something was happening beneath the surface of this perfect, expensive, meticulously planned event that was bigger than wrong-colored flowers or a nervous groomsman. Something was building, something that Chloe, for all her checklists, could not have planned for. The question was whether it would break everything, or whether, and Henry had learned in his 33 years of life that this was always the question worth asking, whether it would break only the things that were never right to begin with. It was 4:47 in the afternoon when Jordan asked to speak to Chloe privately. She registered the request with a professional nod and the particular internal alertness of a wedding planner who has learned that when a groom requests a private conversation 3 hours before the ceremony, it is almost never about the hors d'oeuvres. They stepped into a small anteroom off the main corridor. Jordan sat on the edge of a catering table, both hands folded, looking at the floor. He was a handsome man, older than Henry, broader, with the easy authority of a firstborn son who had spent his whole life being looked at. Right now, he looked like he would give almost anything to stop being looked at. "I need to tell you something," he said. Chloe's clipboard went still under her arm. "Okay," she said. He looked up. "I love Marina. I need you to understand that before anything else. I love her completely. That is not what this is." "Okay," Chloe said again, more carefully. Jordan exhaled a long, slow breath. This wedding, the ballroom, the 5-tier cake, the 200 guests, the champagne tower, the string quartet, none of this is what Marina and I actually wanted. We wanted something small, something real. But my mother and Marina's family, and the whole social expectation of how a wedding in this family looks." He stopped, pressed his fingers to his eyes. "We've been performing a wedding for other people, and I didn't realize how much that was costing me until this morning, when I woke up, and the first thing I felt was dread." He looked at her. "A man shouldn't feel dread on his wedding day, Chloe. He shouldn't feel like he's about to walk on stage for a show he never auditioned for." The room was very quiet. Chloe heard her own heartbeat. She heard the distant sound of the string quartet doing a sound check in the ballroom. She heard, somewhere above her, the ventilation system doing its quiet, indifferent work. She had spent 6 weeks on this wedding. Every detail had been accounted for. Every vendor confirmed. Every arrangement was reviewed and approved and confirmed again. She had built this event with the precision and care of someone who understood that what they were really building was not a party but a memory, something that would live in the bodies and minds of everyone present for the rest of their lives. And now the groom was sitting in front of her, telling her that the memory he'd been dreading was not the right one. Ask yourself this, and I need you to sit with it honestly. How many things in your own life are you doing because it's what was expected rather than what you truly wanted? How many times have you performed a version of your life for an audience that never asked you to audition? Because Jordan wasn't just talking about a wedding. Jordan was talking about something that lives in most of us. And Chloe, sitting in that quiet anteroom, understood this with every part of herself that had ever made a plan to keep from feeling something unplanned. She took a breath. She unclenched her clipboard. And then she did the thing that made her extraordinary at her job, which was also the thing that made her extraordinary as a human being. She set the professional problem completely aside, and she looked at the man in front of her. "What does Marina want?" she asked quietly. Jordan's eyes filled. "The same thing I do. We talked last night. We were up until 3 in the morning. We both want to just be married. We want to look at each other and say the words and have the people we love around us and go home married. That's it. That's all either of us has ever wanted." Chloe nodded slowly. "Then why are we building something else?" Jordan had no answer for that, which was, of course, the answer. She told him she would handle it. She told him not to decide anything yet. She told him, with a certainty she was still assembling in real time, that they were going to figure it out. She squeezed his hand once, professionally, and she walked back into the corridor. And she almost walked directly into Henry. He was standing just outside the anteroom door with a glass of water in his hand, intended, she understood immediately, for his brother. He looked at her face. She looked at him. They both knew, in the way that two people know when they have been operating in close orbit long enough to read each other without text, that the other person had heard. Henry didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't say "I'm sorry" or that it must be hard, or any of the performative sympathies that people deployed in situations like this, when they wanted to seem engaged but didn't actually want to be involved. He looked at her steadily and said, "What do you need?" For the third time today, that question, that specific, undeflectable, take no prisoners question. Chloe realized at that moment that she had never once in her adult life had someone ask her that question with the particular quality of meaning it in their eyes that Henry had. She had been asked it performatively, by vendors trying to seem helpful before they upsold her something. She had been asked to do it professionally. She had been asked about it by friends who meant well but would have been secretly relieved if she said nothing. "I'm fine." Henry was not asking it any of those ways. Henry was asking it the way a man asks when the answer, whatever it is, whatever it costs him, is something he fully intends to provide. Chloe opened her mouth, closed it, looked at him for a half-second longer than she planned. "I need to think," she said finally, "and I need you to take that water to your brother and sit with him for a few minutes." He nodded. "And after that," Chloe said, and there was something in her voice she didn't entirely recognize, "I might need you again." She turned and walked down the corridor before either of them could say anything else, her heels clicking in the quiet, her chest doing things her clipboard had absolutely not accounted for. Henry watched her go. He was smiling when he turned back to his brother's door. The late afternoon light came in through the west windows exactly as Henry had predicted, poured gold across the polished floors, set the white tablecloths glowing, turned the room into something that looked less like a venue and more like a feeling. Chloe stood at the edge of it and felt the beauty of it like a small, private grief. 6 weeks of her life, 42 white and blush centerpieces, a string quartet and a champagne tower and place. Cards written in calligraphy by a woman in Cincinnati who charged $4 a card and was absolutely worth every cent. And somewhere inside all of it, a groom who wanted something smaller and truer and more himself. She had made a decision. It was not without professional cost. It was not uncomplicated. But it was, she understood with the clarity that sometimes only came after long hours and low blood sugar and a conversation under an oak tree with a man who listened like it was his first language, the right one. She found Marina next. The bride was in the dressing suite, still in her robe, staring at her reflection in a way that was about more than eyeliner. Chloe sat beside her. She didn't open with logistics. She opened with a question. "What do you actually want today to feel like?" she asked. Marina looked at her. And then Marina told the truth. The same truth Jordan had told, in different words, with the same relieved exhaustion of a person who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has just been offered permission to set it down. What happened next would require every skill Chloe had ever developed, Every relationship she'd built with this venue over 3 years of contracts and referrals and mutual professional respect, and every ounce of the creative adaptability that had always been her greatest asset as a planner. She was going to have to rebuild a wedding in less than 3 hours. Not smaller in a way that was sad, smaller in a way that was true. And there was a profound, specific difference between those two things that Chloe understood in her bones. She walked out of the suite, pulled up her phone, started making calls, and as she moved through the building, redirecting the catering team, speaking quietly to the venue manager, sending the string quartet home with full pay and a personal apology for the last-minute change, she passed through the main corridor and found Henry already there, already moving, already somehow 2 steps ahead of where she needed him to be, adjusting the ceremony arch, carrying chairs toward the lakeside exit, quietly informing the groomsman of the change in a way that produced zero drama. She hadn't told him what she'd decided. She hadn't told him anything. He had simply figured out what direction she was moving and moved with her. Chloe stopped walking for just a moment. She looked at him across the corridor, this quietly extraordinary man in a simple shirt who had, over the course of 2 days, fed her twice, predicted the lighting, carried boxes, held her hand, for the length of a steadying moment, and was now, without a single word of instruction, helping her save a wedding that was about to become something entirely different and entirely more real. She thought of what she'd overheard him say to his mother the night before, passing in the hallway, the words she had carried with her since, like something she hadn't known she was hungry for until someone offered it. She thought about the jacket, folded over the chair in her hotel room. She thought about the oak tree, the golf cart, the sunset on the lake. She thought about her parents and the church choir and the particular sound of a community that had learned to build beauty from what was broken. She thought, what if I'm allowed to want this? She thought, what if wanting something doesn't have to mean losing it? She thought, what if the most important thing I plan, in my whole career, in my whole life, is the one where I finally put the clipboard down? Henry looked up and found her eyes from across the corridor. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The light through the west windows, exactly as predicted, turned everything gold. And Chloe, organized, controlled, armored, brilliant Chloe, felt something inside her very slowly, very deliberately, very terrifyingly begin to open. She picked up her phone. She made the next call. She kept moving. But she was not, in any honest sense of the word, the same woman who had walked into this building that morning. Something had already changed, something that couldn't be changed back. And what she didn't know yet, what none of them knew yet, not Chloe, not Henry, not Jordan and Marina standing on the edge of their own reinvented story, was that in approximately 40 to 7 minutes, Jordan was going to walk into the main hall, gather his family and his guests, and say something that would collapse every remaining plan, every last timeline, every carefully ordered moment Chloe had built. He was going to change everything, and in changing everything, he was going to give Chloe, for the first time in 17 years, permission to let something beautiful happen that she had absolutely, completely, and utterly never planned for. But that is the thing about the best stories, and the best lives, and the best loves. They never follow the schedule. They just find you, ready or not. And here's the question I need you to sit with as we move into what comes next, because it is the question that lives at the very heart of everything Chloe and Henry and Jordan and Marina are about to discover. If the life you planned is not the life you actually want, what does it cost you to be honest about that? And is the person standing beside you right now someone who would still be there after you told the truth? Have you ever watched the exact moment someone stops pretending? Not dramatically, not with tears and raised voices, and the kind of cinematic collapse that makes for good television, but quietly, the way a held breath finally releases, the way shoulders drop half an inch, the way someone's eyes, which have been doing the careful, controlled work of managing the world, suddenly go still and soft and completely vulnerably present. That was Jordan, standing in the center of the main hall, 43 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He had walked in from the side corridor with Marina beside him, her robe exchanged for the simplest dress she owned, a cream wrap she had packed for the rehearsal dinner, nothing like the cathedral-length gown hanging untouched on its hook in the bridal suite. She had taken her hair down, She was holding Jordan's hand. They were both terrified. They were both, for the first time all weekend, entirely themselves. The guests turned. The string quartet, already on their way out, paused in the doorway. The catering team froze mid-reset. Henry stood at the far end of the room and felt his chest fill with something that was equal parts relief and love, and the specific pride of a younger brother watching an older one finally choose courage over performance. Jordan said it simply. He said that he and Marina were getting married tonight, but not here, and not like this. He said they were walking out to the lake. He said they wanted only the people they loved most, not the social circle, not the industry colleagues, not the obligation invitations accumulated over decades of country club membership, just the people whose faces they actually wanted to see when they said the words that would define the rest of their lives. He said it with Marina's hand in his, and his voice only slightly unsteady, and when he finished, the room was silent for exactly 3 seconds, and then his mother started crying. And then everyone started talking at once. Chloe was standing near the entrance when it happened, phone in hand, mid-call with the catering coordinator. She heard Jordan's voice carry across the room, and she stopped. The call went quiet. She lowered the phone slowly and she listened, and as she listened she felt something extraordinary move through her. Not panic, not the professional alarm she might have expected, not the crumbling grief of a woman watching 6 weeks of meticulous work dissolve in real time. What she felt was something almost unbearable in its sweetness. She felt right, like a note finally landing on the correct key, like something that had been slightly, persistently low-level wrong had just corrected itself with a sound too pure to argue with. She took 1 breath. 2. She put the phone back to her ear and said, calmly, to the catering coordinator, "New plan. I'll call you back in 4 minutes." Then she went to work. What happened in the next 30 minutes was, by any objective measure, the most impressive professional performance of Chloe's career. Not because of the grandeur was, in fact, the thing being dismantled, but because of something harder and rarer, the ability to let go of what you built, completely and without bitterness. Because you can see that something truer is being built in its place. She redirected the catering team to set a small lakeside spread, simple, intimate, beautiful, in the way that real things are always more beautiful than performed ones. She worked with the venue manager, a woman named Patricia, who had known Chloe for 3 years and trusted her completely, to release the ballroom booking for the evening without penalty and convert the lakeside terrace to a ceremony and reception space at a fraction of the scale. She reorganized. She repurposed. She moved through the building like water finding a new channel, not fighting the change in direction but following it with a complete, intuitive trust of someone who has finally accepted that she was not actually in control of this evening, and that this was, against all odds, exactly as it should be. And Henry was beside her throughout, not in her way, not offering commentary, not attempting to direct what she was already directing better than anyone else could, but present, handing her what she needed, moving what needed moving, appearing at her left shoulder with the correct supply at the correct moment, with a consistency that could no longer be explained by coincidence or attentiveness alone, and was beginning to feel like something that had its own name, a name neither of them had said out loud yet. At one point, somewhere between repositioning the lanterns and reconfirming the officiant's adjusted timeline, their paths crossed in the narrow service corridor, and they stopped, face to face, 2 feet apart, both slightly breathless, both with their hands full of things that needed to be somewhere else. Henry looked at her. In his eyes, she saw something clear and uncomplicated and devastating in its directness. "I see you, not the planner. You." Chloe looked back. In her chest, the last organized, defended, carefully maintained partition of her heart did something that felt structurally significant. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm better than okay," she said. And she was surprised to discover that this was completely true. She stepped past him and kept moving. He watched her go. Neither of them said anything else, but something had been communicated with a precision that no words yet had the capacity to match. The lakeside ceremony took place at 7:22 in the evening. 18 people stood on the grass at the water's edge. The lake held the last of the day's light on its surface, flat and glowing, like a mirror left out for the sky to admire itself. Someone had found candles, Chloe had found candles, in boxes that were already packed for transport, and set them in clusters among the wildflowers that grew naturally along the bank, and the effect was something no florist, however talented, could have designed, the kind of beautiful that only arrives uninvited. Marina's dress moved in the soft evening breeze. Jordan stood at the water's edge and watched his bride walk toward him across the grass, and whatever remained of his composure disappeared completely, and nobody minded, and nobody was surprised, because this was what a wedding was supposed to feel like from the inside. The vows were not the ones that had been professionally written and rehearsed and coordinated with the officiant over 3 separate phone calls. Jordan spoke first and said the true things, the specific things, the things that only 2 people who had been honestly close for long enough could say about each other. The small daily dignities they'd witnessed in one another, the particular ways they had been chosen and known. Marina spoke, and the 18 people on the grass were quiet, with the attentiveness of people who understand they are in the presence of something real. Chloe stood at the back of the small gathering. She was not, technically, required to be here. The planning portion of her evening was essentially complete. She could have been inside tallying the inventory changes, documenting the evening's adjustments for the final invoice, beginning the orderly professional post-mortem that she usually started within an hour of any event's conclusion. Instead, she stood on the grass by the lake in the candlelight, and she watched 2 people choose each other simply and honestly in front of the people they loved, and she let herself feel it, all of it, the joy and the tenderness, and the specific, bittersweet sweetness of witnessing something you have not yet had yourself, but can now, for the first time, genuinely imagine wanting. She did not notice Henry standing beside her until his arm was close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. They both looked at Jordan and Marina, but their arms were touching, and neither of them moved away, and somewhere in that small, unspoken decision, neither of them moving away, the whole story tilted toward its ending. The guests dispersed slowly, the way people do after something genuine, reluctantly, in the particular way of people who are not yet ready to re-enter the world that doesn't feel like what they just witnessed. There were embraces and quiet conversations, and the soft percussion of a small celebration that knows what it is and doesn't need to be anything more. Chloe began the quiet work of closing down the evening. She moved through the lakeside setup with the methodical calm of someone who had made peace with the day, collecting, checking, thanking the small team that remained, ensuring that the venue was left better than she found it, because that was simply who she was and had always been. She was alone when she reached the old oak tree. She hadn't planned to end up here, or maybe, and she was starting to understand that maybe was doing a lot of work in her inner life tonight. Maybe she had been moving toward it all along without knowing it, the way you sometimes don't know you're heading somewhere until you're standing in it. The lanterns she had strung earlier were still lit. They swayed faintly in the breeze, threading gold light through the oak's wide canopy, and the effect was something between a memory and a dream. Chloe stood beneath the tree and looked up through the lanterns and the leaves, and let herself, for the first time all day, be completely still. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She knew, without turning, who it was. Henry walked to where she was standing and stopped a few feet away. He didn't have a coffee, didn't have a plate of food, didn't have anything in his hands at all, which was how she understood that this was different from every other time he had appeared beside her today. This was not practical. This was not logistical. He wasn't here to hand her anything, except, possibly, himself. He looked at her with that expression she had catalogued over 2 days, the quiet, attentive, clear-eyed look of a man who had decided to be honest, and he said, "I know tonight didn't go the way you planned it." Chloe almost laughed. "No," she agreed, "it really didn't." "Was it okay?" he asked, and she understood that he wasn't asking about the event. She looked up at the lanterns for a moment. She thought about the burgundy flowers and the golf cart and the jacket and the oak tree at midday and the corridor and his hands carrying boxes and the way he had stood beside her during the ceremony, with his arm warm against hers in the cooling dark. She looked back at him. "It was the best wedding I've ever done," she said quietly. And I barely planned any of it." Henry took a slow breath. He looked at her with the full, unguarded honesty of a man who has decided that whatever this costs him is worth it. "Chloe," he said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "I'm not just a groomsman." He said it without apology and without drama, in the same direct, clear voice he used for everything. "My family, we have money, more than I've let on. I have a company, tech mostly. I didn't hide it to deceive you. I just wanted for once to be in a room where someone saw me before they saw that. And with you, He paused, gathered himself, continued. "With you, I got that. From the first conversation about lighting, you never treated me like anything other than exactly what I appeared to be, and I have been waiting my whole adult life for someone to do that." The lanterns swayed. The lake made its quiet sound nearby. Chloe looked at him steadily. She was not surprised. She had already known, in the way she always knew things about the people who moved through her events, reading the details that others missed. She had known and filed it away and chosen him anyway, which was maybe the most honest thing she had done in years. "I know," she said. Henry blinked. "You know, I've worked with wealthy families for 10 years, Henry. I know the difference between a man who has never had to count a bill and a man who has—" She tilted her head slightly. "I also know the difference between a man who leads with his money and a man who is afraid it will be the only thing anyone ever sees. You've been the second kind since the moment you handed me that coffee." He was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, softly, "And that didn't bother you?" "What bothered me," Chloe said, and her voice was careful now, gentle but honest, "is that I noticed, because noticing you was not in my plan for this week. And I have spent a very long time only doing things that were in the plan." She paused. When she continued, her voice was quieter, the voice of a woman who has decided to put something down that she has carried a long way. "My parents died when I was young. After that, I decided that the only things I could trust were the things I controlled. So I controlled everything. I built a business. I raised my cousins. I planned every wedding except my own life." She met his eyes. "And then I came to this country club to do a job, and I met a man who listens like it costs him nothing and shows up like it's his natural state, and I don't know what to do with that, Henry. I don't have a folder for it. I don't have a backup vendor. I just have—" She exhaled slowly. The word this hung between them in the lantern light, and they both understood exactly what it contained. Henry crossed the small distance between them. Gently, carefully, with the full attention he gave to everything, he took both of her hands in his. "Then let it be this," he said. "We don't have to know what it becomes. We just have to be honest about what it is." Chloe looked down at their hands. His warm, hers, for the first time all day, completely still. She looked up and kissed him on the cheek, soft, deliberate, the punctuation of a decision made. He turned and kissed her in return, briefly, tenderly, with all the patience of a man who understands that real things take time and is not afraid of that. When they separated, Chloe's eyes opened slowly. She looked at him in the lantern light, this quiet, attentive, genuine man who had moved through her carefully ordered world for 2 days and left fingerprints on everything she had been trying to keep pristine. She was not afraid. She was, against all her considerable preparation, entirely unprepared, and she found, to her own astonishment, that this felt wonderful. "I've never not had a plan," she said softly. "Then this can be the first thing," he said. She laughed. The real laugh, the one that escaped before she could compose it, the one that had happened on the golf cart the first night and clearly had not been an isolated incident. Henry heard it and smiled like a man receiving something he had hoped for and did not take for granted. From inside the building, barely audible now through the open doors, the sound of music drifted out across the lawn. The DJ, faithful to the last, still playing soft music into an empty ballroom for a wedding that had ended somewhere entirely different than it began. Henry raised one hand, offered it to her. Chloe looked at it. She looked at him. She looked at the lanterns in the oak tree above them, and the lake nearby catching the light, and the empty dance floor waiting inside, and she thought about a 12-year-old girl who had learned that. The only safe thing was control, and a 29-year-old woman who had just discovered that the most extraordinary evening of her professional life was one she had almost completely not controlled. She thought about Jordan, saying the true things at the water's edge. She thought about what it cost him. She thought about what it gave him. She took Henry's hand. They walked inside together. The ballroom was empty and dim, lit only by the strand lights that Chloe had strung herself 3 days earlier and never taken down. The tables were half cleared, the chairs slightly mismatched from the rapid reorganization of the evening. The champagne tower that had taken the catering team 40 minutes to build stood untouched in the corner, entirely superfluous, almost comic. It was nothing like the wedding Chloe had designed for this room. It was exactly right. They danced in the middle of it, not formally, not with the choreographed first dance precision that Chloe had watched couples rehearse dozens of times. Just two people moving slowly in the quiet of an emptied ballroom, Henry's hand warm at her waist, Chloe's head angled toward his shoulder, neither of them speaking because the silence was saying everything clearly enough. He stepped on her foot. She laughed. He apologized, laughing too. She said something about how she hoped his other skills were better than his dancing. He said something back that she would never quite be able to recall later, only that it made her laugh again, and that this second laugh, layered on top of the first, felt like the sound of something being built rather than planned. They stayed like that for a long time, longer than was probably explicable as a single song, long past the point where two professionals at the end of a very long working day had any rational reason to still be in an empty ballroom together. They stayed because neither of them wanted to be the one to say it was time to leave. Because leaving would mean returning to the world where this was something that needed to be defined and categorized and given a timeline. In here, under the strand lights, it was simply what it was. And what it was enough. Later, much later, when the venue was closed and the vendors were gone and the lake was dark and the lanterns in the oak tree had finally burned down to nothing, Chloe sat in her car in the parking lot for a few minutes before driving back to her hotel. She looked at her clipboard on the passenger seat. The master timeline, annotated in 4 colors, bullet-pointed, cross-referenced. 6 weeks of her life in organized columns. She thought about everything that had not followed the plan. The burgundy flowers, the groom's confession, the impromptu lakeside ceremony, the empty ballroom, the dance. She thought about Henry, his voice, his hands, the particular quality of his attention, which was like being stood in sunlight, specific and warm and completely without agenda. She thought about the question she had asked herself under the oak tree at midday, the one she had been carrying since she was 15 years old. What do I do with the loss? And she realized, sitting in the parking lot of the Elmwood Country Club at 11:47 at night, that the question had quietly, without ceremony, changed. It was no longer, what do I do with the loss? It was something newer and scarier, and full of the particular electricity of a door opening, rather than closing. The new question was, what do I do with the beginning? She didn't know the answer yet. That was, for the first time she could remember, completely okay. She set the clipboard in the back seat. She drove home. Here is what this story leaves us with, and I don't want you to let it pass without really sitting with it, because it matters more than the romance, more than the wedding, more than the lanterns and the lakeside and the soft music in an empty room. Chloe spent 17 years building walls out of the most impressive materials available: competence, care, professionalism, responsibility to others. She built them so well that she convinced herself they were simply who she was. She didn't see them as walls. She saw them as organization. It took one unexpected man and one beautifully ruined wedding for her to discover that the most important things in her life were waiting on the other side of the plan. And Henry, who had everything that was supposed to make a person feel seen and still walked through rooms feeling invisible, found in Chloe the thing that money, for all its extraordinary utility, cannot purchase: the experience of being known before you are evaluated. Neither of them went looking for this. That, perhaps, is the whole point. Because the life that surprises you into happiness is always going to be more nourishing than the one you designed to be comfortable. And the love that finds you when your hands are full of someone else's flowers is always going to be more real than the one you tried to schedule into existence. So here is what I am asking you to do right now, not tomorrow, not when it's convenient. right now while this story is still warm in your chest. Think about one thing in your life that you have been controlling so tightly that there is no room for anything unexpected to enter. One relationship, one plan, one version of yourself that you have been managing instead of living. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me, what would you do differently if you were willing to put the clipboard down? Because every single person watching this has a Chloe moment waiting for them. A moment where the beautiful, unplanned thing is standing right there, patient and genuine and real, and all it is asking is that you stop organizing long enough to let it in. Tell us your story. Drop it in the comments. Let's remind each other that the best chapters are always the ones we didn't write in advance. And if this story moved you, if Chloe and Henry left something in you that wasn't there before, share this with one person today. Just one. Someone who needs to be reminded that love doesn't follow a timeline, life doesn't follow a checklist, and the most extraordinary things that will ever happen to you are the ones that weren't in any way part of the plan. We'll see you in the next story.
Thank you so much for watching, and if you love American Stories, subscribe, like, and comment what you want me to do next.